6, 1 through 3.
Team,
5, 6.
family.
Welcome to Tide TV This Week, brought to you by Renaissance Bank. I'm Chris Fringland alongside Maggie Hetzel.
A busy week, Christopher. A lot of basketball, men's basketball stepping out of SEC for a little bit of that Big 12 challenge, and they fared pretty well.
They did, Maggie. It was a busy week as the Crimson Tide did step out of SEC play this past Saturday to take part in the SEC Big 12 Challenge. Alabama took on Kansas State for just the fourth time ever. A win over the Wildcats would extend the Crimson Tide's win streak to a season high 4 games.
And it was a pretty even matchup early on. The two teams, they traded leads and were tied on 5 separate occasions in the first 13 minutes of play. But with the score tied at 25 with 7:25 remaining before the half, the Wildcats scored 5 straight for their biggest lead of the first half at 30-25. The Crimson Tide, they did respond with a 6-0 run of their own, finished by Herbert Jones on the fast break to give Alabama a 1-point lead, 31-30. The Wildcats, they traded leads several times before the time ran out in the first half, but it was the Wildcats that held the 1-point lead at the break, 37-36.
The Crimson Tide opened the second half with a 23-6 run, including 14 straight points, to grab its largest lead of the game, a 16-point margin, 59-43 with 12:14 to go. Kansas State slowly began to chip away at the Tide's lead, and with 7:45 remaining in the game, the Wildcats made it a one-possession game at 61-58 on a three-pointer by Jawara Cartier. Cartier wasn't finished. Another three-pointer a little over a minute later made it a 1-point game at 62-61, and then leading by just one at 66-65 with a little over 3 minutes remaining. Alex Reese gave the Tide a little breathing room with this three-pointer, giving Alabama the 4-point advantage, 69-65. From there, Alabama closed out the game, hitting 8 free throws. Despite leading by 16 in the second half, the Tide hung on to win by 3, 77-74.
At this stage, with playing a non-conference game in the towards the end of January against a good team. I mean, there's a hard-playing team. They just took care of West Virginia 2 games ago, pretty good. We'll take the win right now and hopefully learn, and guys will be mature enough to know that we've got to fix a lot of things, even though we won. So proud of the guys for the win, but we got a lot to get fixed here before Wednesday.
Kyra Lewis Jr. had his second highest point total of the season with 26 points to go along with 7 rebounds, 3 assists, and a career-best 3 blocks. Alex Reese, Jaden Shackford, and John Petty Jr. all 3 scored 11 in the game. With Herbert Jones, he had his 5th consecutive double-digit scoring effort with 10.
And on Wednesday night, Alabama took their 4-game win streak on the road as the Tide took on the LSU Tigers in Baton Rouge, a tough place to play. Alabama grabbed their only lead of the game within the first minute when Jaden Shackelford knocked down this 3-pointer right there. Alabama would be able to tie it up twice in the first half, with the last time at 16 with 13:09 to go before the half. Alabama, it did cut LSU's lead to just 2 at 25-23 with 10:03 to go, but the Tigers went on a game-changing 18-2 run to take an 18-point lead at 43-25 with 5:47 left in the half. Alabama went to the foul line just 5 times in the first half, while LSU made 17 of 18 shots from the charity stripe as the Tigers led at the half 51-33.
Alabama opened the second half with a 10-4 run that cut the Tigers' lead to 12 at the 17-20 mark. The Tide kept battling back and cut the Tigers' lead to just 9 at 62-53 with just under 12 minutes to play. LSU extended their lead back out to as many as 15 before Alabama cut it back down to single digits once again at 70-61 on this John Petty dunk with under 10 minutes to play. But LSU answered as they extended their lead back out to 14. The Tide would never get any closer than 11 the rest of the way as the Tigers hold off the Tide in Baton Rouge 90-76.
I thought our guys showed some fight in the second half. We did a lot better, but again, I think we cut it to 9 twice. We only had 9 turnovers tonight, but the first time we cut it to 9, we turned the ball over. They score, turn it over immediately on the inbounds play. They score again, it goes right up to 13. It just couldn't get over the hump. So a lot of credit to them. I mean, they're a hard-playing team. There's a reason they're first place all alone in the SEC right now.
Jaden Shackelford had a team-high 21 points with a career-tying 5 3-pointers. Alex Reese had his season-high with 17 points, including 10 in the first half. And Kyle Lewis Jr. had a game-high 8 assists as he added 13 points, with 11 of those coming in that second half. The loss drops Alabama's record to 12-8 and 4-3 in SEC play.
The Alabama women's basketball team, they were at home in Coleman this past Sunday. We'll tell you how Alabama fared against Vanderbilt coming up next.
Tide TV this week is brought to you by ATI. Built by Bama. Rebuilt by ATI Physical Therapy. Ford and the F-150. Tough runs in our family. See your local Ford dealer today. AFS, a Bayless company. Your foundation and waterproofing specialists. Serving you since 2000.
Nate Oates' first season. He has changed the complexion of this program rather quickly.
Oh, baby, what a jumper!
He'll go down the lane. He'll throw it down.
What a play!
Oh, mercy! What authority! My goodness!
Bama fans here at Coleman are on their feet.
Welcome back to Tide TV This Week, brought to you by Renaissance Bank. After 2 narrow losses to top 25 teams, the Alabama women's basketball team, they were looking to get back in the win column this past Sunday against the Vanderbilt Commodores.
Despite Vanderbilt holding a 34-16 all-time series record, going into Sunday's matchup, the Tide had won 4 in a row over the Commodores, including 2 double-digit wins last season.
And Alabama, they got out to a red-hot start against the Commodores, knocking down all 6 3-point attempts in the first period as the Tide scored a season-high 32 points in the first 10 minutes of play to take a 32-7 lead at the end of the first period. Megan Abrams and Brittany Davis, they led the way with 9 points each in the opening quarter. And the Crimson Tide, they continued to dominate their dominant start in the second period as the Tide led by as many as 29 and held a 24-point advantage at the break, 47-23.
In the third period, Alabama continued their onslaught with just over 2.5 minutes to go. Daisha Benjamin gave Alabama their biggest lead of the game at 37 points with this 3-pointer that made it 67-30. Right before the period ended, Sierra Johnson gave the Crimson Tide a 38-point lead with a jumper as Alabama led 72-34 entering the final 10 minutes of play. And in the fourth, Alabama led by as many as 43 as the Tide cruised to a 98-61 victory over the Commodores.
We feel like we've had a couple of moments where maybe we didn't have, the execution we wanted on both ends of the floor, headed in the right direction, and I thought our kids really came out and executed. Anytime you make shots, it makes it look a lot better. Making shots cures a lot, but I love the way we shared the ball, rebounded the ball, defensively how active we were, and it was just a great effort by our team today.
And as you would imagine, with scoring 98 points, Alabama had 5 players and scoring double figures with 11 different players contributing. Brittany Davis, she led the way with 15 points as she connected on 4 of 6 3-pointers by Daisha Benjamin. She added 14 of her own and had a game-high 9 rebounds. Jordan Lewis scored 12 for her 15th game of the season with double-digit points, and Megan Abrams added 11, and Araya Copeland had 10.
For the game, Alabama shot an impressive 70% from beyond the arc, knocking down 12 of 17 3-point attempts for the game. Alabama's bench, they were impressive as well as the Tide reserves outscored Vanderbilt 60-28. Alabama was also dominant in the paint as the Tide outscored the Commodores 38-18. The 37-point margin of victory is the largest for Alabama in SEC play since 1996. The win improves Alabama's record to 12-8 and 2-5 in SEC play.
And the Alabama gymnastics team headed out west to compete against 3 top 20 teams in the Metroplex Challenge this past weekend. We'll tell you how they did coming up.
Tide TV This Week is brought to you by ATI. Built by Bama. Rebuilt by ATI Physical Therapy. The University of Alabama, where legends are made.
Nate Oates' first season. He has changed the complexion of this program rather quickly.
Oh, baby, what a jumper!
He'll go down the lane. He'll throw it down.
What a play!
Oh, mercy! What authority! My goodness!
Bama fans here at Coleman are on their feet. Three-pointer on the way. Bottom!
What a road win for Alabama.
At the buzzer, counted if it goes. It goes!
Top of the key, a three. Got it.
And there's Walker.
Welcome back. The Alabama gymnastics team, they were in Fort Worth, Texas this past Saturday for the Tide's first quad meet of the season.
Number 5 Alabama faced off against number 1 Oklahoma for the second week in a row, along with taking on 4th-ranked Denver and number 18 Georgia.
Alabama started the meet with a season-best 49.45 on the uneven bars, led by a career-best 9.25 from Jency Givens and 9.9s from Emily Gaskins and Lexi Graber. The Tide totaled a 49.1 on the balance beam rotation with back-to-back 9.875s from Luisa Blanco and Lexi Graber. Graber also led the way on the floor exercise, posting a 9.9 to lead the Tide to a 49.075.
To close out the meet, Shallon Olsen and Blanco scored 9.825s on vault to lead Alabama to a 48.950 team total. Alabama finished tied for second behind number 1 Oklahoma. The Sooners won the meet with a 197.525. Alabama tied for second with number 4 Denver with a 196.575. Georgia finished in last place with a 196.300. After this weekend's competition, Alabama drops 2 spots to number 7. Oklahoma remains at number 1. 8 of the top 20 teams are from the SEC.
And after taking on LSU this weekend in Baton Rouge, the Tide will return to Coleman Coliseum next Friday night for their annual Power of Pink meet. Alabama will host Missouri at 7 on SEC Network Plus.
After a 2-0 start on the year, the Alabama women's tennis team looked to remain perfect as the Tide hosted another doubleheader this past weekend against Indiana and Lipscomb.
After sweeping both opponents in their first 2 matches, Jenny Mine's squad did the same this past weekend. The Tide swept Indiana 4-0 in their first match, and in match 2, the Tide did the same, sweeping Lipscomb by that same 4-0 score.
I'm proud of the girls. I think they're working hard. We got a lot of work to do, and you know, the goal is to get a little bit better with each match. I think it'll be fun going to San Diego and playing some teams we don't get to play and we don't get to see.
The wins improved the Tide's record to 4-0 on the year. As Coach Mines mentioned, the women will have some nice weather this weekend as they will play a couple of matches in San Diego. And then next week, the women will welcome Michigan State on Thursday and Iowa State and UT Martin on Saturday.
And with a couple of sweeps and doubleheaders on the opening weekend, the Alabama men's tennis team began the season 4-0, and the Tide was back in action this past weekend, hosting Dartmouth on Friday and Virginia Tech on Sunday. After trailing 3-0 in the opening match to Dartmouth, the Tide battled back but dropped the match 4-2 for their first loss of the season. Alabama did bounce back in Sunday's matchup against Virginia Tech with a 4-2 win over the Hokies. The victory over Virginia Tech improves Alabama's record to 5-1 on the year.
We're going to be a team that may be at times looks like we're not going to win and we're going to claw our way back, and other times it looks like we're going to win pretty easy. We're going to have to really be smart with our game plans and our minds and pull out some close ones like we did today.
The men's tennis team won't have quite the nice weather that the ladies will, as they will be competing in Minnesota this weekend against Drake and Minnesota. The Tide will return home next Friday to host Tulsa at 6. The Alabama baseball team held their first official practice of the spring this past Friday. We'll take you out to Sewell Thomas Stadium for a sneak peek at this year's baseball team coming up next.
Trust each other, love each other, let's do this for one another.
She's meant so much to this program.
But I am so proud of this team and where we're headed.
What a moment for the Crimson Tide when they needed it the most. A double-double was nuts.
We are built by champions.
So much airtime.
We are built by Bama.
Unbelievable play. Swing and a miss, strike 3.
It's a grand slam. Swing and a miss. Oh! Are you kidding me? Wow.
And it's an inside the park home run.
Welcome back to Tide TV This Week, brought to you by Renaissance Bank. The Alabama baseball team returned to the diamond this past Friday as the Tide officially began practice for the 2020 season.
Let's go out to Sewell Thomas Stadium with the Tide for their first practice of the spring. It's brought to you by ATI.
Well, the spirit of the kids is really good. These kids love to play. They love to practice. The energy was really good. I'm glad we didn't play a real game today. You know, it wasn't as sharp as we want to be on February the 14th, but it was our first time playing. So I thought it was a really good starting point. We're as healthy as we've been, and you know, we need to get better, but we got plenty of time to do that in the next 3 weeks.
I would say the pitching staff, they came out pounding the zone. I think a lot of our hitters actually came out ready to hit. Aggressive on the fastballs in the zone. That's always a good sign to see. And then during about every 2 or 3 innings, we did like a bunt situation, and we got like 4 out of 6 of those done. And so I think that's a really positive move right there.
I think we're just a competitive group of guys, whether we're off the field or on the field, in the weight room. Everything that we do, we're just a competitive group, and that's exciting to see from older guys, younger guys, and just a whole mix of everyone.
You know, I've been telling everybody that's been asking, this is going to be a really, really fun team to watch. It's a really above-average offensive group, and they play hard and they play with a lot of positive energy. So I think everybody that was out today is going to probably liked what they saw, and I think they'll be back.
Baseball begins this season in just a couple of weeks on February 14th. A good way to welcome in Valentine's Day as Alabama hosts Northeastern for a 3-game series.
The Alabama softball team, they're currently in week 3 of practice as Patrick Murphy's squad readies for the 2020 season. Alabama has 3 listed on the preseason All-SEC team, and utility player Bailey Hemphill, outfielder Alyssa Brown, and pitcher Montana Faust. The defending SEC champions were selected to repeat as conference champions by the league's coaches, and on Tuesday, Alabama was selected as the #1 team in the nation.
In the ESPN.com USA Softball Collegiate Top 25, Alabama leads the way with 12 of the 21st place votes. 9 total SEC teams are in the ESPN.com USA Softball Collegiate's Top 25.
And the coaches have the Crimson Tide second in the USA Today NFCA Division I Top 25 coaches poll. The coaches have Washington as their #1, but Alabama actually, they have more first place votes than the Huskies with 11. The coaches have 10 SEC teams in their Top 25 rankings.
And Softball America has the Tide at #2 with 9 SEC teams in their Top 25.
Alabama opens the season next weekend in Tallahassee as the Tide will take on North Carolina and Florida State in the Joe Engraff Classic.
Don't go anywhere. Coming up next, we'll have our plays of the week, and who will be our player of the week. We'll reveal who it is coming up next.
Back-to-back jacks, Bama! Oh, what a catch by Alyssa Brown! Are you kidding me? And this one is a shot! Swung on and crushed to left field, and it's another grand slam for Alabama.
Alabama, the outright champions for the regular season.
And Alabama wins it.
There by Kyra Lewis, got to get him a layup. Hard done. Tough spin. Finish! Kyra Lewis Jr.'s got 24.
To the right, back to Lewis on the right wing. Her 3-pointer's up, bottom.
Allie Craig cruises alone and makes no mistake about it.
Those are our BBVA top plays of the week. Now let's take a look at our players of the week, brought to you by Payless Drugs.
Kyra Lewis Jr. led the team in the win over Kansas State with 26.7 rebounds, 3 assists, and a career-best 3 blocks. It was his team-leading 6th 20-plus point game of the season. Lewis was also key in the Tide's win on the road over Vanderbilt last Wednesday. Lewis chipped in 16 points, 7 rebounds, 5 assists in the win over the Commodores. For his performance, Lewis was named co-SEC Player of the Week.
Now let's take a look at next week's schedule for the Crimson Tide. What's next is brought to you by Renaissance Bank.
Men's basketball begins the week with a rare Tuesday game game as the Tide host Tennessee at 6 p.m. on ESPNU. On Thursday, women's tennis, they host Michigan State, and women's basketball host Kentucky at 6 on SEC Network Plus.
Then it's a busy Friday. Swimming and diving begins competition at the Auburn Invitational. Track and field starts their two-day event in Albuquerque for the New Mexico Classic. Softball will take on North Carolina and Florida State in the Joanne Graff Classic in Tallahassee. And then finally, back home in Tuscaloosa, men's tennis hosts Tulsa, and gymnastics will take on Missouri in Coleman Coliseum at 7:15 on SEC Network Plus.
Softball will take on North Carolina and Florida State again on Saturday. Women's tennis, they have a doubleheader with Iowa State and UT Martin. And men's basketball, they'll be on the road in Athens as the Tide takes on the Georgia Bulldogs at 5 p.m. on SEC Network.
And on Sunday, swimming and diving wraps up competition at the Auburn Invitational. And at 2 o'clock, women's basketball, they'll host Auburn on the SEC Network. Thanks again for joining us for another edition of Tide TV This Week.
See you next week, everybody. Roll Tide.
Roll Tide.
This has been a presentation from Learfield IMG College.